Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm James Martin. Today I'm joined by Matt Addison, and it's going to be centre-backs on the agenda for us today. Before we get going though, a message as usual from our sponsors, NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and the link is in the podcast episode description box. Right, Matt, down to business, and in fact down to Liverpool's business. We'll be talking about transfers. We'll be talking about what Arne Slot and Richard Hughes and Michael Edwards want to get up to, specifically in the back line, if indeed we do decide that they need transfers there. Let's start with one of the links we've seen quite a lot of, Leny Yoro. He's an exciting teenage prospect, come through at Lille, had a real breakthrough season. Looks like Real Madrid are in the hot seat, which would sort of follow a familiar trend after Tchouaméni and then Jude Bellingham last summer. Do you think that Liverpool stand any chance of that? And what do you make of why they're wanting to go for him?
Yeah, I mean, it looks, doesn't it, like Liverpool are positioning themselves. So if it doesn't happen for him with Real Madrid, then potentially Liverpool could step in. But I think the sort of situation at the moment, it certainly looks, from what we've heard from the reports in Spain and things like that Real Madrid would be his number one choice. There was a report, I think, in France last week that even if it took Leny Yoro another year at Lille and then he moved on a free transfer to Real Madrid, if Real Madrid couldn't agree a fee for him this summer, then that could potentially be something that they do. But look, it's no surprise really that Liverpool are in that conversation, but it does feel like it has that same conclusion as you've said with Tchouaméni and Bellingham. You can't really blame anyone who picks Real Madrid. I think that is probably, for all of the factors, possibly the most appealing club in the world at the moment. They pay big wages. It's in Spain, so you don't have to suffer the climate of playing in December and all of the rest of it in the Premier League. You get the full package really when you go there. So I don't think anyone could have any arguments if that was to be the case, that was his decision. But I think for Liverpool it makes sense. He's clearly one of the best defenders in the world. We know that one of the things that Liverpool look for is that kind of unique blend of youth but experience as well. And he certainly got that. I think he played 44 times last season. In the French top division, he's clearly a very able young defender to do that at 18 years of age is very, very young, particularly for that position. I think it says a great deal really about the quality and the temperament really that he's got. So it's no surprise that Liverpool are in for him. But the big thing for me really is that if that doesn't happen, there has to be another option that Liverpool look for, because it's a massive, massive priority. The suggestion, I know the Echo has reported this week that might not necessarily be the case. It might be Leny Yoro, but otherwise it's not a priority, as I know we're going to come on to discuss. But for me, if it's not Leny Yoro, it really does have to be somebody else. I don't want to see Liverpool leave themselves short in the bid to get the perfect centre-back. They have to get someone in for me.
Oh, wow, strong words from Matt there. And yeah, like you say, words that potentially contradict the club stance, at least according to the Echo. They have sort of couched Yoro as this kind of unique market opportunity. So Liverpool sees it where, it's not often that a player of this quality, and like you say, all the factors you mentioned with his age coupled with his experience and, the physical characteristics as well. He's big and strong already. They don't have that opportunity on the market too often, which is sort of explained their pursuit of him. But the report goes on to say that otherwise the position is not currently viewed as a priority. It's clear you disagree on that front. I suppose if you try and put yourself in the club's shoes, if we sort of accept that is their stance, do you look at sort of the emergence of Jarell Quansah as potentially what kind of maybe softened their stance from last summer in terms of definitely needing someone through the door?
Yeah, I think it has to be that, and clearly I'm not suggesting for a second that Jarell Quansah doesn't have a huge ceiling in the same way that Leny Yoro does, but for me it's just a case of the pure numbers, and we have to remember that Quansah has only had one season. He's sort of come into the team and done really well, but you don't want to put too much pressure on him. You don't want to overplay him. I think Liverpool have left themselves short in certain areas in the past, and we've seen how quickly things can unravel if Jarell Quansah, just to use him as an example, is overplayed and then becomes injured, then suddenly that exacerbates an already potentially difficult situation for Liverpool. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Jarell Quansah, I think, will play for Liverpool for the next decade. I think he's got the quality to do that, and he's clearly, an absolutely elite centre-back in the making. But it's just a case of there's going to be so many matches. I say it on almost every single podcast, but the Champions League is back, 1, and is expanded 2. So I just don't want to see Liverpool put too much pressure on him. If Jarell Quansah's got to play 3 matches a week for a full season, that's a problem for me. Now, obviously, there are other options as well, as we'll come to, but for me, I want to see Liverpool get the most out of Jarell Quansah. And for me, the way that you do that, even though it sounds a bit contradictory, is to sign somebody else now to play a few more of those minutes and spread those minutes. I think that longevity is best served in that way, to be honest. I don't want to see too much pressure put on his shoulders.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I massively, massively rate him, though. I think it's the sort of old kind of way of looking at it, the kind of cliched argument that if Quansah was the one who Liverpool didn't have and he'd had the breakthrough season elsewhere and Liverpool was sort of racing Real Madrid for him, then I'm sure we'd all be desperate for him to be signed based on, the numbers he's been putting up and the minutes he got in this Liverpool side last season. By the end of the campaign, he'd almost appeared to have overtaken Konate on merit even. Of course, there were other factors at play, but it did seem to be that was the pecking order in the last few matches. So yeah, a huge talent, and of course Konate, another one who has a very high ceiling. So there's definitely a lot of very good players, young players already in these positions at the club, but another one through the door, like you say, to cope with the increased schedule does seem wise. Before we move on from Yoro, though, I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether it would be at all worrying to miss out on him. Sort of, we mentioned the other players who've sort of got away in the last couple of years. Obviously, Real Madrid is a bit of a special case, so you can maybe write it off. But then you look at someone like Moises Caicedo as well. He was sort of a player of interest last summer, and of course Chelsea beat us to the punch there. You talked about weather, and we had a bit of a laugh about it, but it is also a factor in the sense that Liverpool's in the northwest. Often players coming to England prefer the London move. It's been a frustration for the club for many years now. We've had many sagas where players have been insistent they prefer London, and then of course clubs abroad with better weather to offer. That's completely out of the club's control. But in terms of what's in the club's control, do you think maybe it's not quite as an attractive transfer destination as it once was, or has it just been a bit of an unlucky run with a few players?
No, I think they've probably been a little bit unfortunate. I know Moises Caicedo was quick to say that Chelsea was his boyhood club, and there was loads of pictures of him in Chelsea shirts growing up and things like that. And I think that's probably the first time that we've really seen that. But then it does kind of tally up with the age that he is and what Chelsea were when he was a young kid. Maybe that is the sort of Manchester United of 20 years ago or something like that. So maybe it was just the timing in terms of that, really. I think that was possibly a one-off. That the Real Madrid, I think, is just, as you put it, a special case, really. I think that the combination of factors, they're always going to be very, very big. I think it doesn't really happen. I can't really think of any examples, but it would be more interesting to see if Liverpool or Manchester City went for the same player. I suppose Virgil van Dijk is one of those very rare examples, really, of when those two clubs have gone head-to-head, and obviously Liverpool came out on top on that occasion. So it's not something I'm particularly concerned about, to be honest. I think probably the biggest factor, if there is a factor in terms of not picking Liverpool this summer, would be, I suppose, the transition of Klopp to Slot and moving from one era to the next. I think that would potentially offer a little bit of a concern to some people, but that should only be a short-term thing. By January or by next summer, you'd like to think that Arne Slot is, fully integrated into Liverpool. We've seen what his Liverpool team is going to look like, and obviously we all think that that's going to be exciting. So I'd like to think that if there is any kind of hesitation, which I don't necessarily think there will be if it's not Real Madrid that Liverpool are coming up against, but if there is any hesitation, I think it would be on those grounds, and I don't think that will particularly last very long.
Of course, if the Manchester City documentary is to be believed, then Liverpool didn't win the race for Van Dijk. Man City pulled out because the price got ridiculous. I'm not sure if I particularly buy that account. There was a very handy conversation that they just happened to be filming between the executives, where they decided that the price had spiraled out of control, and then in subsequent windows threw a lot more money at various different centre backs, none of whom have come close to achieving what Van Dijk did. So I think Liverpool maybe got the best of that particular battle. But as you say, it's often the case that Liverpool don't really go head to head with these other big clubs. So yeah, it's just unfortunate that there have been these battles with Real Madrid in recent times. Hopefully they can keep their hands off Liverpool targets moving forward. But you give me a nice segue into talking about Van Dijk, actually, because he's probably the other big conversation to be had when discussing the state of the Liverpool centre-backs going into the new season. We know that he's one of the trio of big names whose contract is ticking into its final year at Anfield. And there are conversations to be had, aren't there? I mean, he's the oldest of that trio. I think he's turning 33, and he's on big wages. He's among the top earners at the club. But he did look, if not back to his best, then certainly back to close to his best for the majority of last season. How do you view that panning out? Is it one where you'd definitely be sitting down and talking about an extension, or is it a case of get one more year out of him and then it might be that he's almost run his course?
No, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest. I think you've got to keep him, because I don't really think that there's anybody out there at the moment that is at his level. Maybe there's one or two names that may be unattainable at this moment in time for Liverpool, but generally speaking, to find somebody of the same level but who is younger is going to cost you a lot more than it's going to just cost you to keep him. From what we've seen from him, there's no real appetite to move on. I think it should be a reasonably simple, straightforward thing for Liverpool to get done this summer. I think in terms of the three, he's almost the one that I'm the least concerned about. I think Trent, Real Madrid, there's a conversation to be had there potentially. Mohamed Salah, I think, is a tricky one from just the evidence of what happened the last time, really. But to me, the Van Dijk one, he's only just become Liverpool captain. He's clearly very settled here. There's no obvious place that he would go after Liverpool. There's no interest, I don't think, from his side in terms of going to Saudi Arabia or anything like that at this moment in time, at least. So for me, it's an absolute must that Liverpool get that done. The fact that they seem to be suggesting that they're not viewing centre-back as a priority suggests that possibly they might think that as well, I think. So, I'd be surprised if that one didn't get done. I think the question really is just how much of an extension is it? As you say, I think he's 33 this summer, so he'll be 34 pretty much by the time his contract ends in 2025. Obviously, we've seen Thiago Silva, we've seen lots of other players go well into their 30s, and I'd like to think that Virgil van Dijk can do that. But again, it ties back to what we spoke about before in terms of, in the same way that I don't want Kwanzaa to be overplayed, I'd quite like Liverpool to have Virgil van Dijk for the next 3 or 4 years, but not necessarily play him twice a week for a full season. I think you've got to keep him, but you've also got to give yourself enough options that he can be rotated and not overplayed. So it is a tricky balance, because obviously if you're paying him that money, you'd like to play him as much as possible to get the value out of that. But I just think he's too good to let go at this moment in time, and I don't think there's any appetite. So it feels to me like that one will get done, but obviously not until the Netherlands are out of the Euros and they're obviously through into the knockout phase. So we'll just have to be a little bit patient with that one, I would think. But I would like to think by the start of the season there will be at least some significant movement on that front.
Yeah, slight concern for me is just the sort of quantities involved in that discussion. We don't know at all what Van Dijk's sort of expectations, demands will be. But it's especially with Michael Edwards back at the club, it's hard for me to see Liverpool giving him a new deal on certainly improved terms. Even the same terms does seem like quite a lot for someone who, as you say, is already under contract until the age of 34. But I do more or less agree with you. He's someone who you'd want to be keeping around for as long as possible. We've seen centre-backs, as you mentioned, sort of extend their career longer than maybe we saw in the past with the kind of fitness regimes we see at the top level now. And we've not seen any sign of physical decline in Van Dijk just yet. So certainly one I'd hope to see get sorted. And as you say, if Liverpool really aren't prioritising that centre-back position, then you'd have to assume they're planning for the future with Van Dijk. Otherwise, it really does look like a strange stance to have. But in terms of the rotation options for next season that you mentioned with Van Dijk, of course, Ibrahima Konate, who we touched upon earlier, is one of those. And I was just wondering how you assess kind of his Liverpool career so far, his prospects for the future, because, he's had these moments where his potential and even his existing ability have been very much on display, but there are one or two question marks that have sort of sneaked in.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the only real genuine concern for me is his injuries. I think that's the one big red flag that you've got with him. I think he's a little bit unlucky that the Goodison Park derby last season comes as late in the season as it does. I think if it was 6-8 weeks earlier, maybe that wouldn't stick in people's minds so much, but he was absolutely terrible, if we're being honest, on that occasion. And I think that's kind of influenced people's view of him coming into this summer. I think that's kind of stuck and not really been able to be shifted. Obviously, ends the season out of the team, which doesn't help. But that's partly because of how poor he was on that occasion. And, Jarell Quansah had the shirt, as we said before, on merit. So I think it's a tricky one to balance in terms of your view of him. He does have to become more consistent and he does have to take that next step. But I think we've seen enough from him, particularly in big games as well. I mean, he's played in a Champions League final for Liverpool where he was excellent. He's played in loads of big games and been able to stay fit for significant periods of time. But it's almost a similar thing to Diogo Jota for me, where for him to truly be world class and get to that level and reach the huge ceiling that he's just got to find a way. And it's easier said than done, but he's got to find a way to be on the pitch more often. It's obviously not something that is in his hands necessarily in terms of those injuries. And I think I'm right in saying there's been a variety of issues. It's not like it's one thing that's troubled him. There's been a few different things over the years, and he's had a few different knocks. That's the concern, really. But you'd like to think that Liverpool would have some sort of plan. Again, not wanting to repeat myself, but it's basically about rotation, I think, isn't it? If you've got him and Quansah that can play on that side, they can share those minutes. Maybe if there is, a slight concern over him, there's 5 subs in all competitions now. Maybe you can have a Konate for an hour and then bring Quansah on for half an hour, and that doesn't have to massively impact your game plan, and it doesn't take away a third of your substitutes anymore. So maybe there's a route to Liverpool being able to keep him fit more often. But for me, in terms of his talent and his ability, I think you put aside a couple of the real poor performances that he put in last season. Generally speaking, I think he's a really elite centre-back when he's at his best. It's just a case of being able to trust himself to stay fit. I think there's a big question mark over that, but that's the only real question mark that I've got, to be honest.
And I suppose one of the other ones you could throw into the equation, it's sort of almost up in the air whether you count him as a centre-back these days, but Joe Gomez, he's obviously away at the Euros at the minute, but do you see him as one of the centre-back options under Arne Slot, or do you think he's going to more or less continue in this kind of floating role where he's not really going to challenge for a start anywhere, but can sort of plug in wherever he's needed on that back line?
Yeah, I think that's where I see him really is just continuing to do what he did last season, which plays into the fact that I'd like Liverpool to sign another centre-back. I think it's easy on paper to say that he is one of those options and he can be a rotation option and he can play, and yes, that's true, but also he spent most of last season deputising for people at left back and right back because Liverpool had loads of injuries, and you can very quickly get yourself into a spiral where it's not that hard to see that maybe Trent might get an injury and Robertson might get an injury at the same time, as it has happened plenty of times before. It happened for a sustained period of time last season. Andy Robertson's getting to that point in his career where you wonder whether those injuries are going to become more regular. We've not really seen it until the last 12, 18 months, but then he's had a few injuries and he's had a few knocks. Maybe that's something, Trent, similar to one or two other players, does have a tendency to have an odd 4 or 6 week injury every couple of years. That is something that we've seen with him. That isn't the first time that it's happened last season. So very quickly you can go, well, Joe Gomez is your 4th choice centre-back to actually is your 1st choice left-back for half the season, as was the case last season. That then reduces your centre-backs to 3. Konate, we know if you play him too much, he gets injured. Suddenly you're down to 2. I know that's a bit of a doomsday scenario, but it's pretty realistic, I think, if not likely that can happen. So
that's why I don't want Liverpool to leave themselves short. When you've got all these extra matches, as we said before, it's not that hard really to see a pathway to Joe Gomez not being able to play centre-back, because it's all right that Joe Gomez can play right-back, centre-back and left-back, but he can't do all three at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like I'm throwing reasons at you why we don't need to sign a centre-back, even though I did actually agree that it would be wise to get one through the door. But just before we sort of go on to any potential maybe names that you might want to see come in, if you've got that far in your thinking, let's look at one more reason why Liverpool might be fine, and that is Sepp van den Berg returning from loan at Mainz. He's sort of made it clear that he probably wants to move on for the sake of game time. He's got the taste for it at Mainz, where he was a regular all season. But it has to be said, he was very good. I mean, Mainz struggled in the Bundesliga, just about staying up. In fact, he scored on the final day to help them do that. But, if there was a way where he could, talk to Addison and maybe feature in the plans, is that something that you could see happening? Do you think he's at that level, or do you think probably a move is in everyone's best interests?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I think a move is in everyone's best interests. I think the way I would look at it is if Sepp van den Berg wasn't a Liverpool player, would Liverpool be trying to sign Mainz's best centre-back from last season? I don't think they necessarily would. Okay, you can look to Wataru Endo and one or two others that Liverpool have done in that regard, but I don't think those were first-choice options. They were more contingencies when other things didn't happen. The speculation around him, the suggestion is that maybe around £20 million Liverpool are looking for him. I think that would be quite ambitious, if I'm being honest. I'm not sure I can really see too many clubs looking at that. I do think he has talent. I think he's got ability, but put it this way, if it came to a Champions League game next season and we're looking at Sepp van den Berg playing for Liverpool at centre-back, I'd be a little bit concerned about that. I think from what I've seen of him, obviously I've not watched a great deal of him at Mainz, haven't seen any of him last season. I can only go off what people who have suggested, but it's just a completely different level, isn't it? The bottom end of the Bundesliga, to make that step up, I think would be very, very tricky. So look, it's one of those really where I think he probably feels that as well. I think that's the only explanation really for why he would come out and be so strong and say that he wanted to leave. I know that's gone quiet really, which I think is probably sensible from his perspective to get that move a little bit under the radar, but I don't really see him as an option. I know he's done well on loan, but yeah, it just feels like a big step up. He felt a long, long way off before he went out on loan, and I don't think a good season at Mainz really changes my mind on that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think I'm probably slightly more positive on him. I don't think the club's valuation is a million miles away. It's easy to forget that he's still really quite young, considering he's been on the Liverpool books for some time, but still in his early 20s, which is young for a starting centre-back in one of Europe's top 5 leagues. And what might have interested Liverpool in any of the last sort of 5-6 seasons is that his aerial duel win percentage is kind of off the charts. It's very, very high, one of the best in the Bundesliga, and that has been a hallmark of Liverpool centre-backs in the Klopp era. You look at the top 10 from last season across the whole Premier League. Van Dijk is clear at the top by some distance. I think Joe Gomez finished second, which is perhaps surprising. But then Matip was in and around, Konate as well, and even Kwanzaa. He dropped a little bit towards the end of the season, but he was right up there as well. I think he finished in the top 25 for that metric. So it's been something Liverpool has looked for, and it's certainly something where Van den Berg has stood out. But of course, it remains to be seen the sort of qualities that Arne Slot looks for in centre-backs. We just don't know at this moment in time. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I think we've got to the point where we can maybe talk about someone coming in. And the question is, who might that be? We know that Leny Yoro might be sort of the unrealistic dream option, if you like. But are there any other names who you think maybe Liverpool should be keeping an eye on and who they could potentially more plausibly bring in?
Yeah, I mean, again, it is tricky and it's slightly contradictory in that I'm not sure there is a perfect option out there. Obviously, we've both said that we want Liverpool to sign a centre-back. It's almost a bit the same as the holding midfield position, really, where I think ideally you'd want to see someone come in. I think there's definitely probably a more urgent case at centre-back just in terms of pure numbers. I think in midfield,
it's more a case of the profile and wanting to get somebody with a higher ceiling at centre-back. It is purely numbers-wise. There's been lots of links, obviously. Calafiori for Italy has looked good at the Euros, but again, it's just about finding that value, really. And I think going for him off the back of a tournament where he's impressed probably wouldn't be the most sensible. It does look as well like Juventus have probably won that race anyway. I don't think there's really necessarily any serious interest in him from Liverpool, but it's an easy link to make, isn't it, when people are watching him for Italy at the moment. There's lots of names going to be thrown out there. It's just a case really of who can you find that represents good value within the market. I'm not too sure of an exact name is the short answer. I think that the more interesting thing really would be what kind of profile do you go for. I think probably I would go for a left-sided option to back up Virgil van Dijk and rotate a bit more with him. There is an option that you could maybe go for the right side if you were particularly concerned about Konate, for example, or if you were absolutely 100% sure that Virgil van Dijk was going to stay at this level for the next 3 or 4 years. Maybe then it becomes trickier to make that case to a left-sided, left-footed option, which I think Liverpool would benefit from, but they would then have to overtake Van Dijk in the pecking order, which seems a little bit tricky. So it's getting all of these things balanced out, really, isn't it? I think you've got to look for a younger player with a higher ceiling who would be prepared to come in and be a rotation option. Maybe it's someone that can do a little bit of left-sided centre-back, but also a little bit of left-back, and maybe that's how you get around that. But in terms of a name, that there's no one obvious out there. I can't think of anyone that's been linked with Liverpool that has really jumped out at me and thrown themselves into the mix, really, in terms of my mind. I know there's been lots of links with people like Gonzalo Inacio and things like that, but I'm pretty sure his release clause this summer was the same as what it was last summer, and Liverpool didn't do it then, when most people probably would have signed him then if that was the case. To me, that says that Liverpool probably aren't that interested in him. He might be on a list somewhere, but not particularly high. So in terms of a specific name, it's really tricky. But I don't know. Is there anyone who jumps out at you?
I agree. It is a tricky one in the sense that there's maybe not as many standouts as Liverpool would like before making a move. But as you say, you can't wait indefinitely for those names to emerge. You sort of got away with it last summer, didn't we, with the number 6 position? Even then, Liverpool, of course, tried for Caicedo. It didn't happen. They got an Endo as a bit of a stopgap in the hope that the market for number 6s would be a bit more promising in a year's time. And you sort of look around and think, well, we're kind of in a similar position again, but we can't keep stalling it indefinitely. And I'm sort of at a similar place with centre-backs. I think just whoever's top of the Liverpool list probably needs to come through the door, even if they're not sort of the dream candidate. I suppose the one name I would throw out there, which is definitely a rogue one, but one that Liverpool could sort of try in the next literally 3 or 4 days before the 30th of June sort of soft deadline, if you like, with amid all of the FFP stuff, is Jarrad Branthwaite, which would, of course, be a controversial one from Everton. But Liverpool were linked when he was on loan at PSV. It was reported that they liked the look of him. I don't see anything that's happened at Everton that would have changed that. I think he's looked at home in the Premier League. He's left-sided, which is one of the things you mentioned. I, as far as I know, he hasn't played at left-back, but he does cover that side of the pitch, which is something you'd like. And I think between him and Kwanzaa, you have what could well be sort of the England pairing in 3, 4, 5 years' time. I think they're both hugely talented prospects. I think they've played together at under-21s level in the England setup. So I think there is quite a lot to like about that idea. I know Manchester United have been sniffing around. They put in a pretty derisory bid, I think 35 million, which Everton quickly dismissed. So maybe Everton's PSR struggles aren't quite as bad as they have been. It doesn't seem like they're going to let anyone go, horrendously undervalued. But if Liverpool went in with, I don't know, let's say 50 million, it might at least kind of ask the question of Everton. I'm sure they'd be even more reluctant to sell to us than they would be to anyone else. But yeah, that's maybe the one specific name I might pull out of the hat, even if I think it's a bit of a long shot.
Similarly as well, I'm a big fan of Branthwaite, but I would put Levi Colwill in the same bracket as well, maybe with, again, we know that there was Liverpool interest in the past, and maybe that could be something they would look at. But I know he obviously signed a big contract, but Chelsea are in that position. Maybe Chelsea can do what Everton have done and kind of get creative with a couple of kind of almost swap deals to get themselves out of a little bit of a hole. So they might not need to do that. But I think if it came to it, then he would possibly be one that Liverpool would look at as well. So maybe he's one. But again, they're almost the dream options, I think, in terms of they don't seem massively realistic. They would cost a huge amount of money. They're homegrown, so they take that box. But I don't know whether that kind of cancels out how much you'd have to overpay in order to get them. So, yeah, they would definitely be on my list. I wrote about Branthwaite a couple of weeks ago, but it was more a kind of, I'd really like to see it happen. But I think, as you say, I think Everton, from Everton's perspective, probably from the player's perspective as well, I'm not sure whether he would be comfortable even doing that. I obviously can't speak for him, but it would be a big move, I think, to do something like that.
Yeah, I think realistically, to even stand the chance of it happening, you'd be looking at Van Dijk sort of money, and that's a big price to pay for someone who's looked good, but in maybe one full season as a Premier League regular. So yeah, it's maybe one confined to the what if folder, but still an interesting one. I agree on Colwill as well, excellent player, and of course has that left back experience as well, which is what you touched upon earlier. But yeah, I think on the whole, we're pretty much in the dark about the specific names, but we're very much agreed that hopefully someone does come through the door at centre-back before the end of the summer at Liverpool. Of course, we will keep you up to date with any developments on that front and indeed on all transfer fronts. And of course, as the players continue their participation in the Euros and the Copa America, we'll keep abreast of that as well over on Liverpool.com, where you can read all of our content, and here on the Blood Red channel. In the meantime, thanks a lot, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back next week.